Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and today we're finally going to be talking about the newest album from Avantasia called Moonglow. So when I reviewed the newest Sayor project, which, spoilers, is one of the best albums of 2019 thus far, I made the statement that it was one of my most anticipated metal releases of this year. And funnily enough, the other one was released on the exact same day, and we're going to be talking about it right now. So, Avantasia, symphonic power metal project by mastermind Tobias Sammet. It was something that took a while to truly grip me. Unlike the progressive metal Pier and Arion, the production wasn't always what it should be, especially early on, and while the projects could trigger some immediate standout tracks, I struggled to love the larger albums as a whole. All the more frustrating for me, given that they were intended to stand alone as album statements or concept albums. More often than not, they were just kind of uneven. Good, but not precisely great. And while I was initially high on their 2016 album Ghostlights as reaching for that pinnacle, I expected it to fade on me after I reviewed it. And I was dead wrong, because that album wound up making my year-end list, and one of its songs cracked my top 5 favorite songs of 2016. And discovering how and why that album and the band's highlights in their larger discography have risen in my estimations in comparison with a lot of other acts, that's been kind of fascinating, especially as my early opinions on this supergroup was that the project could trend towards overwrought cheesiness and being kind of derivative. But with so many other symphonic metal acts underwhelming in the 2010s, with Avantasia only picking up steam with better production, more potent melodies, more startling guest stars, and better writing, I found myself really looking forward to this album. I had every reason to expect it to be great. And like with all Avantasia projects, the guest vocalist lineup was stacked. Lavender, Geoff Tate, Hansi Kirsch of Blind Guardian, Candice Night of Blackmore's Night, Michael Kiske of Halloween. It was another stacked lineup, and I was all ready for a gloriously theatrical, over-the-top release, which was exactly what Tobias Sammet was promising. And after the disappointment with Temptation, I so needed this to work. So, alright, enough fussing around. What do we get with Moonglow? Well, honestly, as much as I really don't want to admit it, Moonglow kind of fell short of my expectations. I'm not going to call it bad by any means. I enjoyed this a hell of a lot more than what I got from Within Temptation and what they put out earlier this year. But Avantasia fell a bit short of greatness with Moonglow. As much as I was really trying to love this album, it feels indicative of a problem I've seen in some stripes of metal before. Following a critical success that comes with expanding the sound and refining the core, instead of doubling down on more of that refinement, they just pile on more layers and ideas that start to actively detract from that core. Again, not saying this isn't a good album. It absolutely is, and there are some fantastic highlights. But it's also a more scattered and frustrating listen than Ghostlights, and also indicative that the group might be sliding back towards some bad habits. And yes, I know this is a review that probably should have come out last week, but I really wanted to give this so many more chances to hit that apex point, and I'm just not quite sure it measures up as a whole. Individual songs, absolutely, but as a whole project, can't really say so. And you know what, I want to start with the content, and let's go back to Ghostlights for a second. One reason that record built up so much more resonance and staying power for me was the fact it was a concept album that wound up picking up a fair amount of nuance and thematic density. The inventor convinced to the side of pure science and pure reason, now seeing the mystical world deliver a stunning counterattack, and him trying to find a middle ground between the two, if there even is any. The rare sequel album that I'd argue actually surpasses the original. But Moonglow doesn't really seem to have that same conceptual framework, at least not in the same way, which can be fine enough. Power metal and symphonic metal don't have to have a concept to be awesome, especially if it means more of a focus on self-contained individual track stunners, which I'll say this, Avantasia can do really well. But for as grand and theatrical as Avantasia has always been, am I the only one who finds some of the gravitas is undercut by not giving these songs a more cohesive arc? Tobias Sammet has said in interviews that each song is representative of a different creature thrown into a world where they can't connect and thus will drift towards a more comforting darkness. And really, if you want a larger metaphor for how and why people connect with this sort of metal, it's a good one. I like the idea. But when you have such a wealth of guest talent and they don't seem to be playing more distinctive roles in song after song like was the case on Ghostlights, those ideas and themes can feel more diffuse and scattered, not quite as high concept. Hell, when you tackle track on a cover of Michael Sembello's Maniac to the end of the album, I'll say it only reinforces that scattered feeling. I guess if I were to try to trace a larger arc and just ignore the cover, I could see Tobias Sammet's character as the main protagonist. But if you're comparing the sense of heightened stakes and urgency that pulsated through the writing of Ghostlights, Moonglow feels more relaxed, a little bit looser, almost a little bit smaller by design. Which is kind of weird to say when it's being sold by some of the most powerful belters currently working in power metal. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm definitely not complaining about this, again, frankly stacked roster on this project. I expected Jorn Lande, Michael Kiske, and Ronnie Atkins to bring some real visceral presence, and Hansi Kirsch always shows off his range and well-arranged firepower on projects like this. He's been working for decades and he still sounds fantastic. And while I did expect some real quality from Bob Catley's more level tones, they proved especially valuable just to differentiate the vocal timbres on songs like Lavender, served as a great contrast. What actually caught me off guard was the presence that Candice Night delivered on the title track. She doesn't normally sing opposite heavier production given Blackmore's Night's more of a folk act, but she was pretty damn credible here. Makes me wish she was on more than just one song. And really, if I'm looking at many of the instrumental elements and production tones, there's still a lot I like about this. While I'd argue that many of the hooks aren't quite as impressive as the best of Ghostlights, there are a few that are genuinely terrific. The most notable coming on the opening track, Ghosts of the Moon. That's handily the best song on this project, with the huge choral backing choir and the driving melodic riffs ramping up into those crescendos. Similar case for Lavender, especially with a bridge that owes a pretty considerable debt to Jim Steinman, which again I'm not complaining, and the monster hook for Requiem for a Dream that I'm still not quite convinced given the language being used should work at all. Hell, I put the title track in a similar category, and even if I think the song feels a little bit too short, it still works. And that doesn't count the tracks that are just outright saved by a unique passage or compositional choice. Some of the experimentation does pay off, like the Celtic folk acoustic elements and the baritone choir against the horns on the Raven Child, or the killer guitar solo at the Piper at the Gates of Dawn that really saves the song from that ugly gurgling synth that pops up more than it should. Sadly, like previous Avantasia projects, whenever there's more electronic keyboard passages that they creep in like on Alchemy or Starlight, they're really underweight. They can never really match the sheer power of the rest of the compositions, and really, I'd be happy if the synthesizers just weren't here altogether. But if I were to pinpoint an issue that I've got with Moonglow as a whole, you know what? It might come down to Tobias Sammet himself. Not his vocals, although you can tell he is straining to keep up with some of the heavier powerhouses on this project. Something that a little bit more restraint in the composition could have eased, but going into those compositional choices, several of these just don't feel like they coalesce the way they should. Going back to Ghost of the Moon, for as much as I love this song, the final coda feels completely unnecessary and doesn't melodically link back into the hook in order to pay itself off or justify itself. Also an issue with the Raven Child, where for as many movements and solos are added to the song, they don't feel like they support a strong enough hook in order to justify themselves, and the song doesn't really build effectively. And to drill even deeper, for both the songs that Geoff Tate has midway through the album, Invincible and Alchemy, we have melodic passages that feel really undercomposed, setting up dramatic swell or choral ideas, but landing on bad notes or chords to truly resolve those ideas. And underweight drum lines and grooves really don't help. And when you couple that with songs that are running long and feeling more thematically diffuse than ever, you got songs that not only don't have much of a distinctive identity, but also kind of meander and bring a lot of bombast but lack a lot of proper payoff or contrast, which is kind of awkward when you got songs like the title track that could have used a little bit more of a developed bridge and just winds up ending abruptly. So look, if this review is coming off more negative, I don't know, maybe my expectations were too high again? To be honest, I'm not sure I really want to take all the blame for this here. The talent is plainly evident, and the moments of pure awesomeness on this project only grow with me with every listen. Ghost of the Moon will likely wind up being among my favorite songs of 2019, and Lavender and Requiem for a Dream, they're not far behind. But for the most part, I'm just not convinced the songs are entirely here, especially in the composition. Or if they are, there's some more extraneous elements that are tacked on that detract from a more powerful core or hook. And as such, you know what, I'm giving it an extremely strong 7 out of 10, absolutely a recommendation, but I'd also say for Avantasia fans to maybe temper their expectations a little bit. It's still good, and again, it only grows on me with every listen, but Avantasia is just shy of greatness with Moonglow. Although, knowing this project, knowing Tobias Sammet, returning to that point and making some truly amazing songs, just a matter of time. We'll see. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Yeah, I haven't posted a lot of videos the past couple days. I've been tied up in other stuff surrounding this channel. I may have drafted an entire video essay that will be coming out in about a month, and just working on some of that doesn't exactly mean a lot of stuff is going on right here. We're going to get back on schedule, so don't worry about it, and really not much is coming out anyway that I want to cover. There's not a lot. All of those trap albums, I'm going to deal with them on Billboard Breakdown anyway, and I don't have much interest regardless. Beyond that, hey, if you want to buy or stream the album, highly recommend you do. Links down there below. And I got the poll up there. I'm curious where the more Avantasia fans or the Avantasia veterans will fall on this, because that could be interesting. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And hey, if you guys want to get involved in supporting the channel, link to my Patreon is right over there. Recently I had the votes going up for what's going to go up on Resonators, which also probably should drop this week, we'll see. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.